on the NELMS.org website. But today, more importantly, we are thrilled to be bringing free to members this NELMS Dialogue series featuring Mrs. Meredith Coffin, an 8th grade science teacher at the Cooperative Middle School in Stratham, New Hampshire. Meredith has been teaching for 21 years and has taught science to 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 11th, and 12th graders, both in Stratham, New Hampshire and in Dorchester, Massachusetts. She's the chair of her school's staff DEIJ team and helps facilitate the student DEIJ team at the middle school level. Today, she's going to be sharing ideas with us on how to integrate diversity into your curriculum and how to make your school more inclusive and welcoming through student-led DEIJ. Like I said, at the end of her presentation, I will stop recording and she'll stop sharing her screen, and then we're here for a dialogue and questions, any conversation that comes up. Thanks again for coming, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Meredith. Thank you, Meredith.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here, everybody. I just want to start by saying that I was saying to Tim when we met last week that I have a little bit of imposter syndrome because I don't really know that I'm not necessarily a professional on this. It's just something I've been really trying to make a commitment to. And so if you can take one little thing away from it, that's great. And as Tim said afterwards, feel free to ask any questions that you might think of. A little bit about me as a teacher. You can see I pulled my projector screen up and it's just a mess behind me, and I just didn't have the wherewithal to figure out what to do, but I'm a real life teacher. My favorite thing about teaching is when my students make me laugh so hard that I feel like I'm going to pee my pants, which actually happened last week at one point. And my least favorite thing about teaching is grading. If I didn't have to grade papers, it would be wonderful. But of course, that's a really important way to know if I'm doing an okay job or not. Can you see my screen here? Okay, it's not a very fancy slideshow, but I'm just going to try and highlight some of the things that I've been doing and working on in my school and in my classroom. Just a little bit about my school. It's a 6th through 8th public school. There's a little over 900 students here, so it's relatively big. We're in Seacoast, New Hampshire. We have very little racial diversity here. We have a majority of white student body. We do have some socioeconomic diversity. We have, the very, very, very wealthy students and kids who are experiencing socioeconomic hardship. And our staff is majority white. I'd like to think that I've always been a teacher who has, fought for equity for my students. I think my real journey of self-education began after the murder of George Floyd. It really kind of lit a fire under my butt, so to speak. And I started reading everything that I could. And I've completed several trainings over the course of the years, but these are a couple that I just wanted to acknowledge. The first one was in the time of COVID, all through Zoom, which was through a program called New Hampshire Listens. And we were trying to build an equity team here at my school, which we hadn't done before. So that was a lot about just doing a lot of learning and then sort of the organizing. I also took a graduate class at University of New Hampshire called Critical Social Justice in and Beyond Education, which is where I really did some work on my own curriculum, which I'll tell you about. And then just a recent highlight, I did a training on holidays in schools through the Justice Leaders Collaborative. And one of the things that they talked about in that presentation is what I'm highlighting on this next slide. And it's something that I really have sort of shifted to be kind of the frame of which I look at my school day and my school through, which is in our learning community or in our traditions or routines. What are the things that serve as mirrors for students and what are things that serve as windows? And what I mean by that is if you think about the different things that happen in your school building, like what things allow students to see themselves and their identifiers reflected, like what do they see themselves in? And what are things that they're more like looking through and watching happen to other kids? Thinking about like just holidays as an example, the holidays that you celebrate in your school, depending on how you do that, for some students, they can see themselves represented in it. And for others, it might be more something that they're seeing from a distance that isn't something that they themselves celebrate, perhaps. And I think educators all care about their students, and we all want our students to feel safe and represented. And so really thinking about it that way is, can they see themselves in the things that are being done in your school? So I'm supposed to be the co-chair of our staff DIJ team, but I am the chair because I can't convince anyone to be my co-chair. I have a group that has sort of fluctuated over the years. It really kind of depends on, as we know, teachers take on so much. It depends on how much people have taken on and whether they can make it that week. But we meet monthly. And it started more just sort of as like really probably an affinity space for people to get together and talk about the things in the building that they wanted to try and make change in. And we have tried to become more organized and have more goals and things that we're specifically trying to do. And over the last year, we've really been working on a Google form that teachers can fill out when behavior incidents occur. So, interactions between students or disciplinary things. And specifically within that behavior referral form, a place to identify if that behavior involved discrimination or bias. We found that we don't have a lot of data around that. And we were getting reports sort of from high school students saying, oh, that kid has always called me that, or that kid has always said those things to me. And we really wanted to have a better sense of what was happening within our building. We also wanted to be able to sort of track and identify students who are consistently acting in discriminatory ways so that we could try and use education to try and deal with that issue. We also really wanted to get a better sense of which students were being impacted by discriminatory behavior so that we can sort of work with them as well and try and make sure there's a space for them to be processing any harm that's been done. This obviously requires a lot of staff education and getting people to the point where they are using this form and that they recognize what's discriminatory and what's not. It's still very much in its infancy, but we have gotten to the point now where kind of data has been sent to each team so they can see the students on their team, whether they've been kind of the initiator or the person impacted. And our DEIJ team has sort of been working to give guiding questions for processing that information. Just last year, we started a student DIJ team. It's still very much in its infancy. Our high school has a pretty active DEIJ team, and we started by bringing them down to help train the middle schoolers, which was really wonderful. It does end up being a little bit of an affinity space for kids who just really want to have conversations around that sort of thing. A lot of kids who have actually experienced discrimination and bias themselves are a part of the team. One of our goals is to try and expand the team. And another goal that we're working on this year is to create some kind of an art project that we can have our advisories here within school participate in and paint if they would like to. We also have kids who are very interested in creating learning opportunities for their fellow students, such as in videos and assemblies. But right now, the students that we have on our team don't really want to be on video or on stage. So that's kind of a little bit of a barrier for us. Several years ago, we also had a student book club, and this was specifically around the book. This book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. If you haven't checked it out, it's a really great book that really just kind of walks through a lot of terminology and explaining background for kids who might not have any education in that regard. This started with 7th and 8th graders with kind of under all different kinds of identifiers. And it was just a discussion group. So we would get together, we would have snacks for the kids, we would read a chapter together, and then we would talk about it. I'm going to talk a little bit more later, but giving a space for kids to have these conversations that they often see as controversial or not allowed was really, really wonderful. That is not something we have restarted. New Hampshire has had some legislation that got in the way of this book being used, and we had a little bit of just questions about this book in particular, but it is something that we're hoping to start up again. So the big thing I wanted to talk about, and the thing that was kind of a real goal for myself, was my own science curriculum and trying to make it more representative of my students, or at least allowing my classroom to be a place where we could have conversations. So I decided to specifically look at the field of science and to look at underrepresentation that has happened in the field of science. So sort of looking at who are the people who have been able to do science, who are the people who are given credit for doing the science, and sort of who are the people who have done science and are doing science that perhaps aren't as represented in the field. And I just want to walk you through the way that I did this. I want to give credit, first of all, to the Underrepresentation Curriculum Project, which is a group of physics teachers in the Seattle area, I believe, that wanted to bring this to physics classrooms at high school and college level. So I really kind of modeled my unit after them. And the general flow of the unit is we started by looking at US Census data, and to look at the identifiers that are in the US Census data, mainly sex and race and ethnicity, to look at sort of what are the percentages of people in the US. And then we looked specifically at the different fields of science, and sort of how many male and female scientists are there, what are the races of these scientists, and sort of just compared, the percentages of different races in the US populace compared to the field of science, just to sort of, acknowledge the varying numbers there. We spent time looking at specific inventions and specific technologies that have been developed that have actually been hurt by the fact that there's not as diverse a body of people contributing to it. One example I think of is the oximeter that's used to check oxygen levels in people's blood. Very important during COVID. Doesn't work as well on pigmented skin. So darker skin, it doesn't work. And unfortunately, probably to the detriment of many people. We also did a lot of defining of terms. So we talked about subjective versus objective. We talked about bias, and I think bias is definitely a buzzword that is kind of thrown around out there. But just talking about how we all have bias, we all have biases that come from just where we grew up, what our families were like, et cetera, just to kind of make that word, to de-weaponize that word, pardon me. But then to talk about the bias that comes into play, and like what research gets funded, which students get pushed forward in the science field, which students get held back by stereotypes, et cetera. It really opened up the ability of us to have those conversations, and to have them in a really fact-based and scientific way. Students finish off the unit by researching a lesser known or lesser represented scientist. I've compiled a large database of people who are currently doing science from a lot of different teachers and scientists who have come before me. And they then presented about their scientists, and specifically about the field of science, and the ways in which those people are perhaps underrepresented in the field of science. So overall, this has had an absolutely wonderful impact on my classroom. I know I've mentioned it a couple times before, but the biggest thing is that it opens up dialogue. And I think middle schoolers are really, really interested and curious to talk about these things. They hear adults talking about them. They know that some of them are taboo, or, you hear kids often saying things like, "That's racist," just when someone identifies that someone has a different color skin or something like that. So it gives a platform to sort of have those conversations in kind of a structured way, a safe way where, we have that rapport together. And the thing that really kind of drives me, and I think especially when I think of my underrepresented students, my students of color and my girls, that there has actually been scientific research on underrepresentation and the best ways to combat it. And there's been a lot of theories, but the one that they have found the best results is publicly acknowledging that underrepresentation exists, simply by saying that, you are a part of an underrepresented group, acknowledges to that person what they've probably already noticed and observed. So it sort of validates their experience. But it also kind of fires them up to be like, well, I'm not going to let that be true. And I think, I've seen even that in my own classroom, kids who perhaps didn't see themselves in the field of science or haven't seen themselves, were able to kind of imagine that a little bit more. I think part of that was also exposing them to other careers and the diversity of careers in the field of science as well. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I did do surveys or questionnaires with my students, kind of feedback for them afterwards, for them to give me an opinion on how, they felt my unit went. And most of the feedback, I'd say like the vast majority of it was really positive, kind of widened their view of the field of science. And I think also allowing those conversations and showing them that it was okay to have kind of what people might consider harder conversations made them feel generally more safe and accepted in my classroom as a whole. And that is all that I have on my presentation.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you so much. You can go ahead and stop your share.
Oh yeah, thanks. Forgot about that.
Yeah, no problem. But thank you so much for that. You brought up a lot of different things that we probably can talk about. I'm going to stop the recording now.